in, again, this is a brief overview of the various legal responsibilities that charitable board members have. And we call it minding the business while changing the world, because many people are on boards because they're very passionate about the various kinds of programs and services that a charity offers the community. But if they don't pay attention to the business of running this organization, they jeopardize the long-term viability of the group and those very important programs and services that are offered. And so we want to make sure that good people know how to do good things the right way. And so we provide trainings like this on important issues of running charitable organizations. And just to start out, we want to thank you all for the work that you do. There is no doubt that the work of charitable organizations greatly increases the quality of life that we all enjoy as Ohioans. And if you think about all the various groups that touch our families' lives, sometimes every day, programs that are offered for the very young all the way through those that help us through those difficult periods when people are perhaps dying from diseases at the end of our lives. They offer services that make life easier and better for all of us. And those programs don't come without a lot of hard work from staff, volunteers, donors. And so it doesn't happen easily. And so we want to start out expressing our appreciation for those who are involved in the charitable sector and making a difference for all of us Ohioans. So we take very seriously the work of charities, and we want to make sure that charities protect themselves from those who may have less than a charitable heart in how they look at charities. Rather than allowing people to take advantage of the generosity of others, we want to make sure that charitable organizations are focused on their mission, protecting their assets, and making a difference. And so we provide a number of resources to help charitable board members know how to do this. We provide this webinar every month. We are also very pleased to go out and do live trainings in communities. If someone is willing to host us and invite other stakeholders and organizations to attend, we will come out and do a longer presentation on issues about board governance. We think that helps prevent problems down the road and help better protect donor gifts and the reputation of your charities. We also have several other resources available online. We have a number of publications, and two of our bestsellers are the Guide for Charity Board Members, which you can find online, as well as Avoiding Theft in Your Nonprofit. You can also find another publication, our Nonprofit Handbook. We do a nonprofit newsletter you can subscribe to by email. And again, we do, in addition to this webinar, we have a webinar on the third Wednesday of every month on charitable registration. And again, we're happy to come out and do live training if we're invited. So if you're interested in any of that, please drop an email to the general email address that I provided earlier, which is charitableLaw@ohioattorneygeneral.gov. So the history of the Attorney General being involved in the charitable sector is a very long one. In fact, providing oversight of the charitable sector is one of the oldest and arguably most noble duties of the Attorney General. It dates back to 1601, back in the Elizabethan period, when sometimes people would leave behind gifts for caring for orphans in a particular village, for instance. And sometimes trustees of those funds didn't do the right thing. And so they decided that there needed to be a way to force the trustees to do the proper thing. And they decided that the Attorney General would be the one who would have the jurisdictions to stand in the shoes of beneficiaries and force the trustees to do the right thing with those funds. And so we have inherited that common law authority over the centuries, and we maintain that authority today, and we also have additional authority to regulate the charitable sector that's been granted to us by the General Assembly. When we look at the charitable sector in Ohio, we are talking about a giant, diverse group of organizations. They can be very small grassroots organizations that have been started by a group of grandmothers in the neighborhood wanting to have a local reading club for area kids, or multi-million-dollar giant organizations that may have thousands of employees, may have millions in assets, and everything in between. And so regardless of how sophisticated an organization is, regardless of its size, whether it's big or small, the board members of all of those organizations have the exact same legal obligations. We have a lot of charitable organizations. It's a growing number both in the U.S. and in Ohio. The IRS is the only entity that issues tax-exempt status to organizations. And when organizations become a 501c3 tax-exempt organization through the IRS, that gives them the ability to collect tax-deductible donations from charities. Clearly, all 501c3 groups fall within the category of charities. There are over 1.5 million such organizations. There's 1.5 million nonprofit groups that have been granted tax-exempt status by the IRS. There are various kinds of tax-exempt statuses. In addition to the charities that we discussed, there's also type of tax-exempt status for chambers of commerce or condo associations, various things like that. The one we think most commonly about are the 501c3 groups, and while the IRS has only approved about 1.1 million of those, churches and bodies of faith don't have to apply to the IRS for exemption. They are automatically granted C3 status, and we think there's about 400,000 of those, so we're back up to 1.5 million. And based on what kind of studies you look at, anywhere between 8 and 15% of the U.S. economy may rest on the shoulders of the charitable sector. So it accounts for a significant part of the GDP of our country and our entire economic system. But unfortunately, we run into these kinds of situations that you can find in newspapers all across the state and the country, where someone who was in a position of trust stole money from the organization. These are terrible situations to go through if you're on the board. Generally, the person that has stolen the money is a trusted friend, colleague. You didn't see it coming. You feel responsible for the loss of funds. You feel guilty. Sometimes the economic harm that is done puts the organization out of business, and they're unable to recover the community's trust. Their integrity has been lost. Many times these situations occur because board members didn't take time to live up to their legal duties in developing policies and practices that help protect the integrity and the assets of the group. And so this is the job number one of board members, is to make sure there are policies in place that can guard against these sorts of activities. And while you can't 100% guard against this happening all the time, you can develop policies that make it far more difficult for this to occur, and secondly, allow it to be discovered far more quickly if it does happen, and that reduces the damage that is done. So again, you will hear this repeated throughout the webinar. This is job number one for board members, to make sure policies are in place to keep your organization out of the headlines for these types of things instead of in the headlines for the great work that you're doing. So there are a number of issues that are discussed by policymakers across the country in Congress, and many of them deal with integrity and accountability. Is there transparency about what's going on in the charitable sector, where we've given these organizations substantial tax benefits? Do the American people get their fair share back in terms of the programs and services? So that's another thing that board members need to constantly be thinking about. So what do? We take complaints either through our web page, we take telephone calls, we take letters from folks all over Ohio who express concerns about what might be going on in a particular charitable organization. They may feel that the funds are not being used to support the mission. Sometimes they think that board members are stealing the funds and not using them for services. They may think there are fraudulent solicitations going on where money is being raised for a particular cause and that's not what the funds are being spent for. So we have staff here of compliance examiners, lawyers, forensic accountants, who take a look at these things and figure out what's happening. Sometimes there's nothing at all to these complaints, just perhaps a disgruntled former volunteer. But sometimes we do uncover issues to be concerned about, and we have many options when we discover problems. We may work with the organization to get them on track with proper board governance procedures. We may have to file litigation to recover funds or to force changes on a charity. And sometimes we work with local law enforcement and need to bring criminal charges against people involved in some of the misdeeds that take place. Most people become aware of our office's involvement in the charitable system because of the registration requirements. In Ohio, there's been a registration requirement for all Ohio charities, as well as those that raise funds from Ohioans since 1955, so this is nothing new. It used to be a paper-based system, but it's now all conveniently online. It's far easier for people, so every organization should go into our system to check to make sure that they are current with their registration filings. In every organization, we suggest that at least 3 people affiliated with the organization open an account in this online system that we have. And when you have an account that's tagged to a particular organization, you will get reminders of whenever any sort of filing is due. You'll also get notices and confirmations every time anything is complete. And if anyone goes in to try to change information about the organization, you'll get a notice. And sometimes we have found people trying to change the mailing address of an organization to their home address in an effort to take over a bank account, and we've been able to intervene and prevent that from happening. All the information that is shared in the charitable registration system then becomes public information. And you can go to our Research Charities page in the web page, type in the name of an organization, and if it's in our system, up will pop some information about it. This is also key to helping the public become wise donors. We want consumers to inquire about organizations they're considering giving contributions to. And so on this page, you'll also find listed a number of other resources and tips for learning more about a particular charitable organization. You can use the IRS webpage. There are a number of watchdog organizations. There's also a page where you can look at their IRS 990 filings that gives considerable fiscal information. Those are all listed on this particular Research Charities page. So you can type in the name of an organization, and then up will pop information about that organization if we indeed have it in our system. There'll be various demographic information, how to contact them. You'll also find a box, is this organization's registration status current, yes or no? Hopefully it's always yes. A number of funders like foundations and government funders look to make sure and verify that charitable organizations are compliant with the law on registration and want to see and double check whether the organization's status is listed as being current. But you also find some information about how that organization spends its money. Many people, as a general rule of thumb, look at the percent of total expenses as a gauge for what kind of organization it is and how much of its funds does it actually spend on delivering the actual services and programs of the charity versus administrative or fundraising expenses. And please don't misunderstand, there's nothing wrong with program services not taking up 100%. You would expect every group to have fundraising expenses and administration management expenses. But many watchdogs suggest that the percent of program expenses to the whole should be 65% or more. We don't need to argue with that number because unfortunately we have plenty of organizations that may spend under 20% for program services. So this is something that being a wise donor will cause you to look at this kind of information and decide whether it's a group that you really want to invest in. Again, we have a whole webinar on the 3rd Wednesday of every month at noon that deals just with the charitable registration system. There are a number of statutory provisions that affect the work we do here in our office, and I'll run through some of those very quickly because they are also good resources for you. The Charitable Trust Act at Section 109 describes a lot of the information about how we operate our section in terms of required filings in the registration system. Interestingly, a number of people say, I'm not a charitable trust, I don't need to register with us, I had nothing to do with probate court. But this is the part of the statute that defines what we call a charitable trust. It doesn't have anything to do with how the organization is organized. You could be incorporated or not incorporated. You could be tax exempt or not tax exempt. It basically applies anytime anyone is collecting or holding funds or assets for a charitable, religious, or educational purpose. So it could even be a for-profit entity. And so basically, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, we're going to call it a duck, and we can exert jurisdiction in this case. So charitable trusts must register with us, and we have very broad investigative powers and enforcement authority to take action when we think consumers are being misled or that charitable assets are being misused. There's another statutory provision that also includes a registration requirement. Chapter 1716 applies anytime anyone is asked for anything of value, which could be money, used clothing or furniture, the purchase of a program ad or a concert ticket or a spaghetti dinner. Those all are solicitations. So if someone is asking Ohioans for that kind of support, they need to be registered with us. Unless they are a church or a body of faith, that's the largest category of exemption. Some organizations hire professional solicitors to raise funds on their behalf. Those professional solicitors have to be registered and bonded. 1716 also gives us very broad investigation and enforcement powers. 1702 is the nonprofit corporation law. If you're incorporated in Ohio, it gives a number of operational expectations about how nonprofits should be organized. It's a fairly lengthy section. It can be good bedtime reading. We also have jurisdiction in part of the criminal code, the gambling code in 2915. Our section licenses bingo as a fundraising vehicle for organizations. You have to have a license. There are significant record-keeping requirements because it's an all-cash game with all-cash volunteers often. And so it's very easy, unfortunately, for funds to walk out the door instead of being used for the charitable purpose. So we do routine trainings throughout the state called Bingo School, helping people to better understand how to set up and run a proper bingo game. So I invite you to take a look at those training dates that you register for through our webpage. Another thing to always think about is that whether you're big or small, you have the same duties when you're a board member. We talk about the duty of board members in terms of fiduciary duties, and we talk about them in 4 ways, and we're going to go through them. Duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty to maintain accounts, and duty of compliance. So we don't expect people who serve on boards to be lawyers, CPAs, financial gurus. Regular Sue and Joe Schmoes make great board members. But what we do expect them to do is to conduct themselves with a level of care, skill, and diligence that an ordinarily prudent person would exercise in the handling of his or her own affairs. So we expect you to take as much time and energy in thinking about how you handle the money at a charity as you do your own family money. And if you wouldn't treat your family money in a certain way, then don't treat the charity's money that way. So if you wouldn't cash out your paycheck on Friday, put all the cash in a paper bag and leave it on your porch overnight for your son to maybe pick up by noon the next day, Don't do that with the money from the concession stands at the Friday night football. You wouldn't do it with your money. Don't do it with the charity's money. So what does it look like if you're living up to your duty of care? Well, you're going to attend meetings, you're going to prepare, you're going to actually read materials that might be prepared in advance, and when you don't understand things, you're going to speak up and ask for an explanation. You cannot delegate away your obligations to make decisions based on what's in the best interest of the group. So you must actively participate. You can't just always refer to the loudmouth on the board or the founder who says we've always done it this way. You have to be individually satisfied that the positions that you're taking as a board member seem reasonable to you. So you must actively participate. Again, you're going to establish policy. Those kinds of things I talked about being job number one of protecting assets of a group. Make sure you have policies in place for how you're going to handle cash, how you're going to handle budgeting, how you're going to handle deposits and accounts payable, making sure you have separation of duties so that multiple people are checking and you're not vesting your faith totally in one person. If you have staff members, the board's going to be involved in selecting key staff members, the executive director, that sort of thing. We're going to go through conflict of interest issues in a bit, but again, this category of financial controls. Take a look at the publication I mentioned earlier, the Avoiding Theft in Your Nonprofit. It includes 20+ suggested procedures that might make sense to adopt in your organization to make sure that you are properly taking care of what you have. And by the way, those needs will change over time, and so you need to constantly reevaluate if those policies make sense today or whether you need to develop new ones. You're going to have policies on major expenditures. A major expenditure for the Cleveland Clinic is sure going to be different than what a major expenditure for the Grandmother's Reading Club is. What makes sense for your group? What do you want to do when you have major expenditures? Are you going to ask for bids from multiple providers? Are you going to collect pricing information from at least 3 vendors, that sort of thing? What makes sense for where you are? When are you going to hire professionals? The board needs to have a well-thought-out plan for when it needs to hire a lawyer, for instance, or an architect if they're doing a construction project. You're going to need to have spending and investment policies. Many new groups think they're a long way away from needing investment policies, and they only dream of needing to have them. But when the time is right, those are things the board needs to think about. The board's going to have policies on how it conducts its meetings. How often does the board meet? How many committees does it have? How do they report in? And then whistleblower protection, where when something is going wrong within your organization, you want to know about it so you can take prompt action. So the shortcut way to remember what your duty of care is, just pay attention. Duty of loyalty. We all wear many hats in our lives. We lead busy lives and we have multiple hats to wear. But when we are sitting at that board of directors meeting, we are wearing one hat and one hat only, and that's what is in the best interest of that organization. So we're concerned about situations when board members may have other things going on in their minds that may weigh in on how they make certain decisions. So deciding on issues based on whether it generates additional business for your company or whether it's a way that you can elevate your own status within the community or do favors for friends, none of those things are okay to being part of the consideration in how you vote as a board member. So we're talking about conflicts of interest. So usually conflict of interest policies start with a disclosure statement that you would collect each year, updated annually. It will gather information from your board members about their affiliations, their employment, where people in their household might work. And then whenever an issue comes up before the board that may touch upon those issues, you're going to expect that the board members identify those and speak up and say, I may have a conflict on this issue and ought not to be involved in this discussion. So the way it may work is, for instance, if you are with an organization that wanted to build a gazebo in a local park, the board may send out proposals for that project to all the construction firms. I may be on the board and own a company called Beth's Builders. My company may want to bid on that job, and if I do, when this issue comes up before the board, when they're going to open these proposals, when that agenda item comes up, I need to right away say, pardon me, but I have a conflict on this issue. I'm going to excuse myself from the room. Make sure that the minutes note that Beth left for this agenda item. The minutes are the official record of what happens in that meeting. Problems with conflicts of interest don't generally happen the very next day or the next week. It may be months down the line. So you don't want to have to call everybody and say, I think Beth left the room. I kind of think so, but I can't remember. Get it in the minutes. So I leave the room. The other board members are left to go through all the proposals, and it may well be that maybe my company has a bad reputation and someone says, well, Beth's Builders, the roofs always leak on every building they build. I don't think we want to use them. If I'm out of the room, hopefully the remaining board members have a feeling that they can be more candid and honest about the discussions. They can be free to say those sorts of things, far freer than if I'm there giving them the evil eye. So I need to be out of the room for that discussion. But it may well be that Beth's Builders does great work. I submitted a proposal that's only at cost. And so other board members need to weigh all the proposals that have been presented and decide, in an objective way, which proposal is in the best interest of the organization. They select that proposal, vote on it, and then at that point I get invited back into the room, and it can go into the minutes at that point that Beth has re-entered the discussions of the board. So it's important to think about having people with clean hands, with no other hats on the table, making important decisions about the work of the organization. This also happens to really help enhance the integrity that you're viewed with, and the transparency can become obvious to community members as well. So what you really ideally want to have happen is a culture on your board where they routinely discuss these issues. The problem is not that a conflict has arisen. The problem becomes if you don't deal with it. So unless you have people living under rocks that serve on your board, there will be conflicts. So you need to talk about it, discuss it, and then act appropriately. The third duty we talk about is another no-brainer. Duty to maintain accounts. And so we expect that there will be financial records that are maintained and that financial issues are properly managed. You do this in your household, do it with your charity. We expect there to be accurate records of income, where it's coming, and expenses, where the money's going. We expect there to be budgets that are monitored. Charities have to make important decisions. So many times we do the same thing in our family, and it's not any different. So if I want to take my family to Disney World for spring break, and if the Attorney General decides I need a 20% pay cut, I may need to make an adjustment and get a second job in order to be able to take my family to Disney World. Or I may have to decide to just cut my expenses and skip the vacation. Charities need to do the same thing. So if fundraising revenue isn't coming in at the rate that it was projected, you may need to find additional tools for raising money, or you may have to cut some of your programs. And so these are the kinds of things that should be monitored throughout the year. If your budget showed X amount for utility expenses and your expenses are coming in far above your budget, ask questions. What is that about? Is there some adjustment you can make? Sometimes those deviations from budgets are a red flag that someone may be taking advantage of your organization. So it's your job as a board member to ask questions and become satisfied that what you're dealing with is the real reality of what's going on and that money isn't leaking out in other places. Again, you find a reference here to the importance of establishing internal controls, making sure there are checks and balances, making sure that there's more than one person who is taking a look at what's going on with the finances, someone else reconciling the bank account information, and checking. You'd want this to happen with your family. Make sure it happens with your organization. So we expect to find, if we need to do an investigation, accurate records of organizational activities and keeping a record of what goes on in the life of your organization. There are many resources online for finding suggested policies like this. CPAs often provide them to their client organizations. Even the IRS, I believe, has some suggested policies online. So take a look if you are looking for some records retention guidelines. Some things I should mention you also want to keep as permanent records. Always keep your IRS original letter granting your tax-exempt status. While you can get copies from the IRS, it can often take a long time to get another one. Sometimes those records are required for various grant applications or government contracts. The final duty we talk about is another no-brainer, the duty of compliance. And so there are many things that board members need to be mindful of and compliant with. Federal and state law, and we're going to talk about a couple of those. Your governing documents. If your bylaws say that you're going to have a membership meeting every October, then by golly, it must go on your planning committee planning agenda for the year, and you have the annual meeting. If it says that the nominating committee will present a slate of officers for consideration every September, that needs to happen. This is a document that you set out to the public explaining how your organization is going to work, and you have an obligation to follow it. If it no longer makes sense to have the membership meeting or the slate of officers presented in that manner, change the documents. You can change those, but up until you do, you are expected to follow what those documents say about how your organization is going to operate. You may have other agreements and contracts in place, and you need to comply with representations you make in solicitations. So if you're raising money to build that gazebo in the park, you better build the gazebo instead of using the funds on a cat shelter. These are the kinds of things that we expect board members to be mindful of and comply with. So under federal law, if you are a tax-exempt organization, there are various requirements that the IRS has. Many of them relate to these kinds of board governance issues. You're required to file an annual return with them unless you're a church which is exempt, a church, temple, synagogue. They're exempt from those kinds of filings. Those returns are public records that our organizations need to make available to the public. There's also a website, guidestar.org, where you can get free copies of 990 returns. So incidentally, the filing deadline for the IRS 990 return is the same due date as our charitable registration filings, and we honor all IRS extensions. There's two provisions in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that was adopted 10 years ago that applied primarily to publicly financed companies. One, whistleblower protection, and secondly, if you are in the midst of a federal investigation, don't destroy documents. On the state side, there are a couple of things to be mindful of. We've talked about your registration and filing requirements with our office through the online system, and I'd mentioned that the due dates for your 990 and our filing are the exact same dates. The IRS will grant exemptions. If they do, we accept that same exemption and extend your deadline, but generally it's the 15th day of the 5th month following the close of your fiscal year, so it's all pegged to when your fiscal year ends, whether you're on a January to December year for your activities or July to June. That's how your filing date is determined. If you're incorporated, and most organizations are, you've done that through the Secretary of State's office. So incorporations, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit, have filed articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State. When your articles are current, that means no one else can use the name of your organization. There are other benefits that come with being incorporated, but you need to file a continued existence statement every 5 years in order to keep your articles current. They want to make sure that your organization is still in business. You can go into the Secretary of State's webpage, go to the business filings search, type in the name of your organization, and up will pop a box with information that will tell you what year that filing is due. I suggest that you check once a year, and then you don't miss that 5-year window. It's not a problem generally to file and get them reinstated, assuming no one else has taken the name of your organization. Depending on the kind of work that your organization does, there may be other employer and industry regulations you need to be mindful of. If you have employees, certainly just like any other business, you need to pay attention to taxes, Social Security, workers' comp, unemployment. You need to do that if you're a charity too and you're employing people. If you're engaged in doing healthcare related issues, your board ought to be mindful of HIPAA requirements and other sorts of regulations particular to the kind of work that your organization is doing. So board governance doesn't ever end. Organizations need to continually evaluate where they are, make sure that policies are being followed, and determine whether those policies still make sense. And if not, you refine them, retune them, and do something different. Fiscal management is what seems to cause the highest level of nervousness for many people joining a board. But I find that if people look at charity budgets, much like you look at your old household budget, it becomes far more manageable. So, you know, in our own households, we know the sources of revenue, salaries, other places that money comes from. We also know those general categories where money walks out the door on our house payment or car payment. Look at and think about the similar kinds of expenses that come up in your charity. When does the money come in? Are there some times of the year where there's not much cash rolling in, and what do you need to plan for? Are there gifts that you've received that you can only use for a particular purpose? There are often restrictions that come with donations, like maybe a particular donation can only be used for research. Make sure you're honoring those kinds of restrictions that your donors have placed on you. If you're not willing to accept those restrictions, do not accept those gifts. You need to check to see if the funds seem to match your projections and your budget. And if there are deviations, are there good explanations for them? If not, take a look deeper. Is someone stealing from your organizations? You also want to, look at trends over the years. Those can give clues to what you ought to anticipate. Just like in our households, charities have assets and liabilities. Ask questions about, are there any changes in those categories that affect the bottom line for your organization? What should the board do to respond to some of those changes? Again, preventing theft, job number one. Make sure you have policies in place that protect your funds. Not only do these kinds of policies protect the money, but it also protects the reputation of individual donors. It also protects the reputation of your organization. You want to protect the people as well as the organization so you can continue doing those kinds of activities. So constantly think about whether you have reasonable measures in place that protect your organization and its volunteers. Boards really need to make sure that they're exerting independent oversight. Not okay to just rubber stamp everything that the CFO or executive director says. Board members need to play a crucial role in thinking through any problems with the fiscal situation and possible ways to resolve it. While many groups like to think they have the best executive director on staff, that's a great thing, but you still have an obligation to provide oversight of that staff person and also providing independent judgment. Not okay to just rubber stamp automatically everything that the executive director says. You need to have discussions about it and make sure you're independently satisfied. Boards are going to be involved in the hiring of executive directors, so it's important that they have an idea of what kind of skills you want, what the expectations are. They check backgrounds, that sort of thing. Then you're going to want to think about setting goals for performance. How often do you want to hear from the executive director? Under what kinds of situations do you expect to hear from them? You also want to evaluate the executive director. Maybe get feedback from stakeholders, maybe from staff members, partners in the community, other organizations that work with you. How do they see the reputation of your organization and also the reputation of your executive director? And then boards need to make thoughtful compensation decisions. So you want to pay your executive director something that's comparable to what others in similar situations are paid. So you can gather information about payment levels for people in your community that are doing similar work or people within your industry that are doing similar work. So again, here's a rundown of some of the various kinds of policies that you're going to want to think about. Do they make sense for adopting in your organization? You must have budget policies, gift acceptance and receipt policies. Are there certain gifts you don't want to accept? The American Cancer Society, for instance, doesn't accept any contributions from tobacco industry. How are you going to let people know that you received their gift and you're appreciative of it? How do you record it so that they can take advantage of the tax deductions? How much money you're going to want to have for a rainy day fund or in other accounts to cover other contingencies? How are you going to handle purchasing various types of equipment, cars, major expenses that you may encounter? How are you going to keep your records? What kind of records are you going to provide to your board members every month? You're going to have fundraising policies. If you have a lot of volunteers doing work on your behalf, do you want to approve those ideas they may have in advance? You certainly have a right to exert authority over how your logo can be used. Do you want people to raise money on your behalf at a cigar smokeout or shooting gallery? Maybe that makes sense for your organization, or maybe you're engaged in the kind of work where that becomes a situation that you don't want to be affiliated with. Are you going to receive audits? You're going to hire independent folks to audit your books. What kind of whistleblower policies? Again, we talked about conflict of interest and records retention issues. These are all part of what it takes to run a charitable business. I suggest that every organization do an annual checkup. At the beginning of every year, sit down with the board, go through your bylaws, make sure everyone knows what's in there. Are you living up to the promises that you've made in those documents in terms of meetings or other activities of the board? Get it on a planning calendar. Take a look at the policies that you have. Is everyone aware of what policies you have in place? Do any of them need to be renewed or reviewed over the course of the year? Maybe the board makes it a decision that over the coming year we're going to look at our HR policies and think about updating them. Make sure you get your conflict of interest statements updated at that point, and take a look at other things pending so that everyone starts out with a clear understanding of the business that's going on. At that meeting, I would also get on the planning calendar who's going to take care of filing the 990, the charitable registration filings, who's taking care of budgets, staff evaluations. Go in and look at the Secretary of State's webpage, see if that's your year for filing the Articles of Incorporation Continued Existence Statement. These are things you can set up at the beginning of the year, and then actually, for continuity's sake, you can follow it year to year about some of those must-complete activities and hand that down from board to board so that they don't have to start with zero next year and reinvent the wheel. You may want to think about whether the board wants directors and officers coverage, and if there are new board members coming in, maybe it'd be a smart idea to have a board orientation where you go through what the regular business of the organization is, the services it provides, the kinds of information presented in the financial reports and issues that come before the board routinely. And sometimes boards decide to periodically engage in strategic planning, taking a look at what services they deliver, whether there are new services that should be considered, whether those services they do deliver are still needed in the community, and that sort of thing, taking a really a look at where the organization sees itself going in the future. And in great organizations, the boards evaluate themselves. How is that board doing, living up to its obligation to be responsive to the needs of the organization? Maybe the board then decides that they need to tweak some of their operational approaches. Maybe they need a new committee to add. Maybe they need new board members that represent a wider geographic area, or people that represent various types of expertise. These are things that great organizations do. The boards take a serious look at themselves. Well, years ago, there were not that many resources out there to help do-gooders who wanted to make a difference in their communities. But today, there are plenty of resources out there, both online and in books, to help organizations figure out the best way to get things done effectively. I mentioned before that the Attorney General's office, we have a number of resources both online, and again, we are happy to come to communities to do board governance training, which would be a more detailed look at board governance issues than what we're able to do on a webinar. Take a look at our publications, take a look at our newsletter, subscribe to it. If you come up with other ideas of things that we could offer that would fit into our oversight capacity, let us know. The Better Business Bureau and the Ohio Association of Nonprofit Organizations both have some excellent materials on their webpage. They have standards that they use to evaluate various organizations. Take a look at those standards. The Charity Seal program for the Better Business Bureau, where they will, for free, evaluate your charity after you provide information to them and decide whether you meet their standards. And the Ohio Association of Nonprofit Organizations has a Standards of Excellence program, which is a pretty exhaustive look at whether a group represents the very best practices that have been identified nationally. Take a look at the standards of both those organizations and evaluate your charity against those standards. How do you stand up against those national standards? What are some areas that you can improve upon in your organization? Those are the kinds of things that are perfect for board members to take a look at and try to lead their organization through. Boardsource.org is a great resource for publications and other information about charities, and the IRS even has some very good resources on their webpage at irs.gov. Their stay exempt materials are also very good. And the Chronicle of Philanthropy is a publication that comes out monthly that takes a look at various trends within the charitable sector. Libraries and bookstores have tons of books geared at running charities, managing volunteers, fundraising ideas, all kinds of nonprofit topics. One thing that we often overlook within the charitable sector is talking with other charitable leaders about how they have responded to specific challenges in the past. Too often we in the sector see other charities as competitors for funds, whereas they really can be seen as partners in trying to achieve great things for the community. Talk to them. What ideas do they have to offer? And then if your organization has decided that maybe it needs to update its HR policies, think about finding a local expert. Maybe a company or business may have a manager with expertise in that area that they might consider loaning to you for that particular project. Oftentimes it's difficult to find people who are willing to be on the board because it often feels like a lifetime of service. But if you have a discrete project with a beginning or end, that can be a great way to get really high caliber expertise as your board takes on a particular topic or project. So we are open to ideas. We encourage you to contact our office if you have questions. While we cannot give legal advice, we can try to point you in the right direction. And we're eager to do that, so feel free to contact us. Again, this is our contact information. I encourage you to give us a call, reach out to us through the charitable law at ohioattorneygeneral.gov if you'd like some materials or if you'd like to set up a training. We would be most happy to see that happens. We're very appreciative for all the work of charitable leaders, and so we thank you for what you do in making Ohio a better place.